Hi all, and thank you very much for coming, for joining our session here. I'm Paul.
And I'm Pavla.
So Paul and Pavla here will run you through a bit of criminality. We are with the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which is a network of investigative reporters, editors, technologists, and many others working to expose crime and corruption every day. We're doing this for a long time. Yeah? I think we met each other in 2008 for the first time.
Yes, probably.
We have a good story from back then, because we went together to Cuba, and
Met in prison.
and we became criminals there because we got arrested in Cuba together. So we go way back. So we kind of know what we're talking about. You know, this is the idea, being in the shoes of the criminals. So what we'll try to do today is we'll introduce you a bit, to what the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project is, a little bit about our platform, just about 5 minutes. Pavla will talk a little bit about the Czech Center for Investigative Reporting, which she founded, and that is part of OCCRP. And then we'll both put on our criminal hats. We'll both become criminals. And we'll tell you a little bit what makes a successful criminal, what it takes, what it means, what are the risks, and what's the opportunity in that. So Pavla will start, I'll follow. Then we'll change again, our characters a little bit, and we're going to go the way of law enforcement. That's going to be a much shorter period of time because criminals dedicate a lot more time to crime than cops do to fighting crime. Is the unfortunate truth. And third, in the third part of our discussion here, we'll become journalists. And unfortunately, journalists dedicate less time, to crime than we should be dedicating, most of all because of the numbers and many other issues. We'll try to co-opt you a little bit in our criminal enterprises from time to time. So please be open about it. Everybody here in this room has criminal potential, I'm sure of that. Okay. And then, obviously, we'll leave a little bit of time for questions and and answers. Although criminals don't really like to answer your questions, So we'll keep it really short. So, okay, just a little bit about OCCRP. This is our website that you see here. We are right now the largest investigative reporting organization focused on organized crime and corruption in the world. We are hundreds of investigative journalists, editors, and others working together. And to give you a graphic idea of who we are mostly, we have lots of editors. I think it's actually more than 50 right now. This is from November last year, I think. These numbers are from November last year. So we are this platform where we work with a lot of investigative reporting centers that are focused on crime and corruption, centers that investigate really thoroughly at the local level, like Pavla Center in the Czech Republic, like CRIC in Serbia, like IDL in Peru, and that we cooperate with, and so on. So the idea is that we're kind of harvesting this local knowledge at the level of a platform where we can understand a bit better what's going on when it comes to transnational crime and corruption. We've had quite a bit of success over the life of OCCRP, of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. One of the measures that we bring to measure our that we use to measure our success is how much money was seized from criminals, from corrupt corporations, from dirty politicians, and it's more than 7.3, actually a little bit more right now, billion US dollars. So we're talking about big money here, and this is, of course, not something that happened just because we did our reporting. This happened because we work across networks with civil society. Our information is then used by law enforcement and by others who can act against the criminals. We can't act against the criminals. We expose criminals. Now, there's a lot of other action that happens as a result of our work. As you can see here, I won't go into this. But just one thing that's interesting. OCCRP in the first, about 10 years, our first 10 years of operation, we've used a budget of about $7 million US. With that money, we contributed to, at that point in time, to about more than $5 billion US being seized from criminals. This is more than 50,000% return on investment. It's better than cocaine trafficking. So become investigative reporters following organized crime and corruption. The return to society is great. Now, this being said, you know, we are all over the world. We're hiring currently people in, we're trying, for instance, to build this unit that follows cybercrime quite thoroughly around the world. We're building a unit that's going to be capable to follow crypto assets, because you need to adapt to how criminals think and how criminals act. Criminals are early tech adopters all the time, and they're very creative. You know, they're not the usual thug, you know, at the corner of the street, you know, who robs you and, you know, pickpockets you, and those people might be working for you know, criminal networks and others. But the criminals that we'll be talking about right now are the criminal entrepreneurs, are the criminals who make a difference, the criminals who really go big at crime, who think big, who are very creative, and who hurt a lot of people in the process. Now, just to give you a little bit of an overview of how we set up our work, our workflow. We are, you know, as I mentioned, lots of editors, investigative reporters, the centers for investigative reporting that operate locally. Then we also cooperate with other networks. We cooperate very well with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. We cooperate very well with, and we are members of GIJN, the Global Investigative Journalist Network. So there's an entire ecosystem out there that we're part of, and this makes our work very, very efficient. So we do have, for the past few years, a very competent fundraising team. We have an amazingly competent, you know, for many years, a tech team that takes care of you know, keeps us secure, keeps us safe, but also develops tools to do our work. And we'll talk about those tools when we become journalists a little bit later on. We do have a research arm that's doing amazing work. One of our latest projects, we're tracking down Russian assets across the world. We started in Europe. We're looking at many, many other countries, again, in cooperation with many other media outlets. All this is collaborative work. So with this, Pavla, can you say a few words about the Czech Center and then go into the crime mode?
Yeah, okay. Does it work? Could you hear me?
Push, okay. So I'm going to talk from the position of a member center. We are just a tiny team of 10 people, and we try to cover what's happening at the field of corruption and organized crime in Czech Republic. But of course, you can't really focus on one country when you want to track organized crime and corruption. So we work a lot with the others within the OCCRP network. What actually brought us to the cases that did not, at the end, touch Czech Republic or the region of Central Europe at all. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about, how accidentally I became expert on Balkan organized crime in Latin America. You know, there's no organized crime in Czech Republic, so I needed to go full Balkans. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how I learned how global organized crime operates. And that's a point where I need to mention, there is honorary mention of our colleague who is not here, but would love to be here, but was not invited. His name is Stevan Dojčinović. He's director and founder of member center of OCCRP that is called KRIK. It's based in Serbia, and he's like this walking encyclopedia on Balkan organized crime. And we started to work together a long time ago, and what I learned about organized crime is mostly from him. And now I will just switch, and I will switch to the role of organized criminal, Doña Estebana, as the owner mentioned to Stevan, and I will explain you how to create successful global organized criminal network in 5 easy steps, and I hope you won't be able to use it, never. So, when you consider a career in organized crime, you should start probably quite young, because the best way, probably your age is still good, don't wait too long, because the best way how to start is, of course, to go and study how to do it. But, you know, it's not really that you can go to any normal university to study, and that's why we have prisons. So prison is actually the university of crime. What I would suggest to you is that you would focus on the crime, on the global crime that you want to be expert on. It could be cybercrime, then get arrested in Russia. It could be global cocaine trade, then I would strongly recommend to get arrested in Peru or Colombia. If you want to go really into something more like financial scams, go and get arrested in Romania. It's good to be foreigner because then you will go to the prison for foreigners, and there you can build your first network of contacts. What means global contacts, not only the ones that you would build in your own country. And once you will create the first network of contacts, you will probably be able to better understand what's needed within the infrastructure and who to ask for help, or with whom to deal and close partnerships. So what I've learned from conversations in prison is that you can also run the business from prison, because once you are in prison, no one can arrest you and put you in prison. It works very well in South America. You can easily run the business from prison, and you can, just create the contacts, and that you can use anytime later.
Sorry, Pavla. You can infiltrate jails in other ways as well, right?
Yes, but probably at some point they will kick you out because you were not sentenced. Yes, what I'm sharing as experience here is actually my experience when I went to prison in Peru to ask one narco to give me interview how he's doing the cocaine trade, what was very naive of many levels, because, when I was going to the prison, it was something that is called conjugal day, what means only women can enter to have a sex with their partners, or what is also great opportunity for hookers. So I was asked I came as black pants, black t-shirt, hoodie, and they said, no, you need to change your clothes. So I rented like really sexy outfit that was for rent there, and entered as a hooker to ask this narco to give me interview. And my idea was that I am going to enter the prison, and there will be like this huge glass window, and we will talk over the phone, and there will be 7 guards watching us, just making sure nothing would happen to me. And instead, I went through the whole prison to his cell that was locked from inside, to my surprise. And I knocked on the doors, and I said, I'm a journalist from Prague, from Europe, and I want to do interview with you. And he said, I hate journalists. So that was not really the icebreaker. Anyway, I promised we can talk. We don't need to talk about the cocaine trade. We can talk about, any kind of things he wished to talk to, but we ended up talking for 6 hours, drinking coffee. He borrowed me his coat so I wouldn't freeze. It was quite cold. And that's how I learned some of the basic elements, how the business is done, just, in between the lines. Once you will have those contacts in prison and you will understand, who are the providers, who are from who you can source, for example, the cocaine or illegal arms, then you need to start to think big, because you have really excellent opportunity to build something big once you have the source material. So it's good to think about the critical points of your infrastructure. If we are talking about cocaine trade, those are ports. You need to somehow be able to ship the cocaine to the countries where you can sell it for a good price. Majority of the cocaine that's going to Europe is going on ships, in containers. So it's good to focus on ports and understand if you have a long-time plan, what means you will, go to some poor family, said, I will pay for the education of your kid, but your kid, who is now 5 years old, one day will be, working at the port as a port worker or police officer or custom official. And then you will actually invest in this person who then will be your person at the port. If you don't have so much time, something like 15 years probably, then you need to find someone you can bribe immediately. Also, your contacts in prison may also help, because I'm quite sure there will be some corrupt custom officials. Then you need to consider another thing. You need the ports on both sides of the world, in South America, but also in Europe. And now it's your time to decide if you are going the whole project in, or if you are going to make alliances. So you would lose part of your money, part of your shipment, but you wouldn't need to take care of each step in the process. And as we promised, we are going to talk about the new trends. It's important to mention that in the last 5 years, this changed. There are not groups anymore who would be in charge of the whole operation, from contacting cocaleros, who were selling actually the leaves, to the street dealing. Recently there are no such groups really, and the chain broke, and they are creating alliances, so each cartel or group or clan is responsible only for part of the shipment or of the shipping route. So I will leave this to you, but it has many benefits. If anyone can just, shout what could be the benefits of really breaking the chain and not leaving it very hierarchical. Just shout? No?
You can continue even if you, for example, close a circle of the supply chain, and you can take only that part very quickly.
Exactly. First, it's almost impossible to destroy, because you can easily replace one part instead of whole part. It's almost impossible to attack, because there are many leaders, not just one or two, and it's very efficient and effective.
Great. So let's move now. Sorry. So it's my turn now to be the criminal, and we always joke at OCCRP that we're modeled after a criminal platform. And it's exactly what Pavla was talking about, decentralization. We are made of these modules. Pavla Center is a module inside OCCRP. There's all these parts that make OCCRP, and then we have the level where we connect all this knowledge, and there's information sharing, there's all this. So I'll show you first a photo. This is myself and my co-founder, Drew Sullivan, some years ago on a boat in Riga, where our kind and nice colleagues here gave us this suit, to pretend that we're mobsters, and we actually had a lot of fun and booze that night. It was cool to be a mobster, and so I'll call this this part of my talk, the criminal angel investor Drova Sullivan. What is a criminal angel investor? This is something that we've actually defined at OCCRP. I mean, when I'm hearing Pavla speak, I say, this is a very smart criminal. I need to invest in this criminal. I need to support this business plan, but I need to make it at my own advantage. I need to make money of it, right? As I need to harvest the information that sits with Centers for Investigative Reporting in order to create something that's useful to the public. In this case, the public, it's myself. I'm the criminal. I want to make money for myself. And I have to think big, as Pavla said. So what I will do is I will try to invest in crime, to create more opportunity for crime, to do it wholesale, to do it in bulk. Now, for that, what you gotta have is vision at the global level. What that means, if you look at crime and corruption, and if you work on these issues, for some time, what you understand is that crime is a commodity. For instance, if you have a criminal scheme, a criminal model that works here in Perugia, be sure that the same criminal model, the same criminal scheme will be applied in Rome, will be applied in Albania, in Tirana, will then travel across the ocean, and so on and so on. We'll go to Africa, we'll go everywhere. Because if a criminal structure works, if it makes you money, then there will be an import and export of crime and corruption across borders. And actually, criminal angel investor Drova Sullivan just entered the room. So again, this being a commodity, when we think about crime and corruption at OCCRP, we see patterns in crime. Now, this is what criminals see as well. They see patterns and opportunity. What they see is an illicit market that, according to very conservative estimates, is more than $2 trillion every year. This is big money. As a successful criminal, I want a big chunk of this money. So what do I do in order to get the market? Well, first of all, I need to build transnational business and financial infrastructure. And you all here know about, how criminals and oligarchs and politicians attached to crime are using these very secretive, opaque, offshore type of companies. And they can be, in offshore havens, or they can be, here in the heart of Europe, in Switzerland or in Austria or elsewhere. So I would build this business infrastructure made of offshore companies. So I'll check that, and I'll see, hey, who can be really efficient in helping me do that? And this would be the formation agents, the people that have as a business the company formation. And then I would speak with a few of them to make sure that I don't really centralize anything. So I will keep my eggs, the Easter is coming soon, right, in many baskets. And then these companies will need, and my money flows will need banks and bank accounts. But I won't think just in the sense of my money. I will think in the terms of creating opportunity for Pavla and for other criminals like her. So I will say, so what is Pavla's need? Well, she has some money to launder, right? Because she's a successful drug trafficker. So what I would do in this case to help Pavla and to help many other Pavlas out there is to create a pipeline for money laundering by saying, okay, I'm going to set up these companies.
A lot of cash, a lot of cash.
Yeah,
tons and tons of cash.
Tons and tons of cash, yeah, a lot. So what I would do is I would control the banks, and I would go really, really big at it and announce for people like Pavla things like, I have, a pipeline to launder $20 billion. Do you need it? And Pavla might need it. But so could other criminal groups. In fact, we've seen at OCCRP bank accounts used at the same time by multiple criminal groups. I would then, of course, because I want to be, up to date with what's going on, I would set up a few crypto exchanges because while I don't want to lose the fiat currency that flows in these markets, I also don't want to use the crypto. I don't want to use the Bitcoin, the Monero. I don't want to use anything, lose anything. So I want to create opportunity for that and say, hey, I have these crypto exchanges that I just set up, and I can launder money in the tune of another 20 billion or more. And then I would, of course, make logistical arrangements. Pavla was mentioning logistics, ports. You need shipping. You need, transshipment. You need trucks. You need trucking companies. You need all sorts of logistics that come with the physical side of the criminality. But I will also need the virtual side of this criminality across this logistics, which is called the trade-based money laundering. This is, where you pretend you're shipping things just for the sake of laundering money for Pavla. So once I put this in place, to have all this protected, I will need to build a political infrastructure. And I will go quickly through this, but obviously you need to co-opt politically exposed persons, law enforcement, journalists. You need to corrupt journalists. There are many corrupt journalists, unfortunately, around the world. You need a fund for advancing business. This is mostly for bribes, and that's usually going to be less than 5% of your total business kind of volume, and that's even an exaggeration on my side. Usually it's very, very low. I mean, law enforcement and politically exposed persons and journalists are cheap, really cheap. Yeah. Across this network of politicians and everybody, I would put pressure. I would change the laws so that I can take advantage of them. But I will also think very big on this. I won't think about the laws in one single country. I will think about the laws in 2, 3 more countries at the same time. So what do I need to change in the law, for instance, in a country like Romania, which is my country, for the law enforcement to not be efficient in Mexico? Which sounds kind of weird. Yeah, why would you even need that? Well, there are networks of trafficking of people from Romania to Mexico, across the Rio Bravo, into the US. And if I make sure that the law enforcement in Romania cannot investigate these type of cross-border networks because they have to stop at the borders, and I issue a law about that, then the Romanian criminals can go about their business without any problem, right? So I would always think in bits and bits of the crime to make sure that my people will be safe. I will keep on lobbying. In many countries, this is completely legal, but I will make sure that the lobbying, again, through parts of it, help and advance my business. And I would, of course, capture and annihilate, if I can, independent media, civil society, anyone that can oppose me. Pavla Center would be in danger for this, and she is under attack. How many lawsuits did you have in the past week?
4.
Well, there you have it in 1 week. Yeah. So, and this is part of what I call the fear infrastructure. In order to be a good criminal, a successful criminal, you need to build this fear infrastructure. And this is made of compromat. Compromat is always king. You got to have digital and physical surveillance of the targets. You got to keep them in check in that way. Politicians, journalists, everybody, their families, and so on. Any lawyer in this crowd here? Anyone a lawyer? Oh yeah, I see one over there. Hello, hi. And one with a lot of knowledge about SLAPs, which are strategic lawsuits against public participation. So these are the lawsuits that are used to silence journalists, to not allow the public to know the truth about organized crime, about big-time corruption, about kleptocrats, and so on. And I think, there are, unfortunately, many lawyers, not in this room, willing to help criminals, attack journalists and stop the truth from being told. I would also mount these disinformation campaigns. I would try to smear Pavla, as much as possible. I would try to, use those photos where she entered the prison, and try to use those, although there are no photos of that kind. So on. So disinformation, and if you can't bribe someone, if you can't motivate someone with money, if you can't defeat them through legal means, we will probably end up killing. And that is another thing that you know, a successful criminal has at their have at their disposal. And then, well, and then of course I would use conflict sometimes. You know, I would trigger conflict between various factions, and this can go from political conflict to war. You know, a lot, unfortunately, lots of the wars that we're seeing in Latin America, in Africa, in many other countries are triggered by organized crime and by the interests of organized crime. They might get a political dimension, they might get an, you know, ethnic dimension, other things, you know, but those are usually, you know, just pretexts for something that's where, you know, you really need to follow the money to find out what's going on. And I would, of course, as a successful criminal and a criminal entrepreneur, I would acquire as much property as possible to make sure that the future of my, you know, children and friends is insured. I would diversify my portfolio a lot. I mean, I would invest from crypto assets all the way to real estate. I would think, and this is important, lots of the criminal money, and we're talking, you know, trillions, are sunk into property all over the world. And this is not just, you know, the luxury mansion somewhere in London. This is, you know, these are water surfaces, forests, and so on and so on. Over the years, unfortunately, the criminals amassed a lot of land, and land means a lot of power. And then, of course, I would keep on investing in crime, in destroying democracy, in destroying transparency. Transparency is my enemy. And so these are some of the steps that I would take and some of the tools that I would take in order to be a successful criminal angel investor. And then after I have all this in place, Pavla, Stevan, and all the other successful criminals out there, Drew, will come to me and will use my tools and will become more successful in their turn, and the public and you here will become poorer, and, you know, democracy will be constantly under attack. So with this, let's switch to law enforcement. Pavla will give us a little bit about her insight, recent insight. She's been in Peru last week, right? So please, Pavla.
Okay, so now a little bit of bragging session, why we sometimes as a journalist have easier life than law enforcement when we are dealing with transnational organized crime. And this is information that's coming from my talks with law enforcement, surprisingly, but they have real issues when they need to deal with really big cartels, big groups that operate on both sides of the ocean. And imagine that you are a prosecutor in Peru, and, you know, they just complain that, you know, they requested files on one criminal group from Netherlands, but they never received even a response, we are not giving you anything. And, you know, they don't know what's happening. If it is a trust issue, if it is wrong department they are requesting for cooperation, they just don't know what's going on because they did not receive any answer at all. And when we talk to more, you know, people at the police department, they said, you know, you are lucky. You can just, you know, call someone, ask for help, ask for files, ask questions, but we need approval for every paper we are sending abroad. Quite often, you know, the structure within the police is that, you know, all the people, especially in Central Europe, who are leading the special units of the police, they don't speak any other language than Czech. So they are afraid that those young ones who do speak the foreign languages can somehow destroy their progress or career because they are just better. So they, you know, they just put all kinds of restrictions on them so they can't really work properly and won't get the proper stamps and papers and requests. Also, quite often, and now I'm back in other countries than Europe, the reports the police is working with can be motivated or can be tainted with the information provided by organized criminal groups or organized criminals themselves, because they want to, they are playing games. They want someone to investigate something and leave them alone, or they want, to not to actually got in such a harsh position to be so investigated in such a detail. So they provide some kind of information that is not accurate, but it will lead the police to the wrong way of investigation. Also, what is a problem is that you have different parts of law enforcement, and quite often they don't communicate with each other. You have also the wars within the police force, and that's also something that you need to consider, that if you start to work with someone, they would say, oh, you are talking to them, so we are not talking to you. And yeah, that's probably why we, as a journalists who know each other and trust each other, have much easier life.
Yeah, and just to add to this, all law enforcement in the world is national, right? It's paid by the citizens of a country, and they operate inside borders. Criminals are not. They can operate at ease across borders. So what we're doing at OCCRP quite often is we're talking to police, sometimes intelligence, brilliant people, some of them, but they only have pieces of the puzzle. They only know what happens in their own country, and they give us an insight into their way of thinking, sometimes access to documents, but they're really limited, and they're very happy to talk with journalists that have a bigger perspective on things very often. Now that is, as Pavla said, it's a very murky world there, because these intersections between criminals, sometimes intelligence agencies, police, it's a territory where information constantly flows, and much of it is tainted. Much of it has ulterior reasons, ulterior motives that are not the public interest. So, and criminals are very keen and very good at taking advantage of that. They sometimes give a few peanuts to a police officer who's glad to complete a case while doing a much, much bigger crime, while the criminal is involved in something much, much bigger. So this is the problem. The fragmentation in law enforcement is what makes the criminals operate with impunity across borders. There are cases, I think, Pavla, where law enforcement cooperate very well across friendship. If I would be an officer police officer in Peru, targeting narcos, and maybe Pavla is a police officer in Mexico, we would probably have a relationship where we exchange information, where we talk quite often about trends, about other things like this, but we would still have our bosses to answer to, and they might be the people that Pavla just mentioned, who don't speak other languages, who don't travel as much, who don't understand crime, and who are not interested in risking their lives at all in the public interest. So I think let's go a little bit on how to investigate criminals. So we'll put our journalism hat, and what we're usually trying to do in all our interactions with criminals is to understand how they work and the ecosystem where they operate. When I started doing this work, just like Pavla, I was going from jail to interview criminals of all kinds to find out how they work, why do they do the crime, and what is their future. They were keen to talk. Criminals who are in jail are usually keen to talk with you because they're isolated there. You know, they have some of them have long-term sentences, and some of them don't care about being in jail because they conduct business as usual from inside a cell, just as Pavla mentioned. So speaking with criminals is very, very important. But as I mentioned there, and as Pavla mentioned, you know, the 5 steps to becoming a successful drug trafficker, and as I shown a little bit of the kit, the toolkit that makes a criminal angel investor, you got to understand that criminals don't operate in a bubble. they have a lot of interaction with you, with the world on the outside, and we gotta understand each layer of that cooperation. So what we're doing at OCCRP is we built a type of a matrix that we're calling the people and deeds. This is, with each criminal group, you have obviously the criminals, and then you have the crimes. So the criminals would be the people, the crimes would be the deeds. But you have much more in between. You have the service providers. I was talking quite a bit about lawyers, about people helping you set up financial infrastructure, companies, bank accounts, people maybe helping you set up crypto exchanges, maybe people buying equipment for you to mine cryptocurrency, and so on and so on. So you need all these people. This is what we call the criminal services industry. The criminal services industry is an industry that has been formed for many years and is supplying criminals with what they need for higher markups than what they charge regular businessmen, regular business people. So the market out there is a lot more lucrative when you work with criminals. It's a lot more dangerous as well. Lawyers who work with criminals usually don't end up very well. They might get wealthy in the short term, but they usually end up dead. Now, of course, we have, as we mentioned before, the investigators, and this can be the investigative reporters, this can be the police, intelligence agencies, and so on. Rival criminal groups, private military companies or private investigators hired by criminals to do this type of work. And we do have, of course, the victims. So what we do with each of the criminal groups that we're investigating is we try to build this matrix where this is, for instance, a group that we have written about and exposed 2 years ago. It was a group that started in Eastern Europe and actually had operations here in Italy quite a bit. They were schemers. They were these people putting these devices on ATMs and then stealing your credit card data and cloning them and taking some money from your bank account. But these people moved to Mexico after years of criminality, so they graduated from various universities. They were in jail in various countries, and they just upped the game. So they became very successful in Mexico, which is kind of amazing, right? Eastern Europeans very successful in Mexico. Mexico is a crime-ridden country, unfortunately, with many very powerful criminal groups. But what these people did, what the Eastern European did, was instead of installing schemers on ATMs anymore, what they did was they created their own companies, and they had an agreement with a Mexican bank, and they used fake documents to close that agreement, to sign that agreement, and so on, to install ATMs all across the Riviera Maya, from Cancun to Tulum, Playa del Carmen, all those places. Their ATMs were there, so they didn't need to install anymore the schemers on other banks' ATMs. The ATMs themselves were the schemers. So they took the business to another level. This is what criminals always do. They think big. They think how to scale up, how to get more of that $2 trillion US dollars market. So this is what we're doing here is we're looking at all the people that have a role in these criminal networks or who are victims or investigators, and we try then to see the deeds, the parts. A lot of this organized crime is integrated. The drug trafficker won't be just a drug trafficker, might be involved with many, many other crimes, weapon smuggling, and so on, people trafficking. You always need to integrate. You always need to scale up. You need to be on the dark web right now. Now, unfortunately, Hydra market was closed down, was shut down a few days ago, right, last week or so. So now that's actually a good business opportunity for us, maybe as criminals, right, to create a new digital criminal market. So going, if you really want to understand and to expose crime, you really need to understand what surrounds crime and what enables crime. And in terms of how you get to this information, I'll let Pavla tell you a little bit about her own way of doing things.
Okay, so for me, it was also a question. There's no way how to study organized crime except, ending up in jail. But there are ways how to learn step by step. So, you know, my first advice, if you want to really get into investigative journalism, focus on organized crime, just read as much as possible of court files, police files, files from the prosecutors. You know, when we went to Peru to study one case that we are now working on with Stevan, who is the guy from the first picture, we were so happy to obtain these, you know, files, you know, thousands and thousands of pages of information that we can actually use. But after 12 hours of taking pictures of those documents, it ended up like this. You know, we just can't anymore, you know, just seeing any other page of this amazing document make us sick. Anyway, we now have like thousands and thousands of photos of pages of police reports, and that's how you start to build a case. You start to extract the names of people who were involved. You start to read to understand, you know, what is the angle in this investigation done by professionals, in this case, law enforcement. You create a database of people according to the region. You start to learn why some people work together and why some people don't work together. For example, we came with this, you know, quite shocking information that in South America there is something that is called Cartel de los Balcanes, what means Balkan cartel. But at the same time, it would be like if you would like to study organized crime in Mexico, and you would come with the idea that there, you know, there's Cartel de Mexico, and it's some kind of, you know, super cartel collecting, you know, joint cartel for all the Mexican cartels. And then we started to build on it and ask questions, and we learned that actually it's quite accurate, because those are now joint ventures, you know. As I told at the beginning, you know, it's not one cartel controlling all. Those are groups of cartels controlling parts of the business and working happily together. And so you read files, you start to understand, you talk to the police, and then you need to understand if, you know, those people are all from the same village in Italy, let's say. What does it mean? If it is same tiny village in Calabria, what does it mean? If it is, let's say, same tiny town in Albania, does it mean? And usually it means trust, that those people trust each other. And then you see other people who totally don't make sense in the structure, like, for example, you know, Cartel de los Balcanes, and, you know, together doing business with people from Ukraine. And then it starts to make sense, because you see, like, there's Odessa, and it's a huge port where you can buy many services. So that's how you start to build the cases. You start to collect the names. You start to collect the names of the companies that were involved. You start to check it in the business registry, in the land registry, and you start to make the network that works as a network and the responsibilities of each member of the network. And when you start to understand, then you probably need to go to prison and ask someone, what does it mean?
And to really not end up like this, what you do, what we do at OCCRP is we've built pretty intelligent systems where we're processing a lot of information, the data that Pavla collects, that Stevan collects from law enforcement, from other sources, from criminals. I'll show you one of the main tools that we're using is called Aleph. This is where we pour in all these records, and this system does entity extraction. It extracts the names of the persons and then matches those names against many other databases, so that we can make sense of the Ukrainian names that show up in the data and find out, yes, indeed, they are connected to the Odessa port because they show up in a shipping company that's based in Odessa or that's based in Moscow, and so on. So this zoom in and out between field work. Field work is crucial. Without the field work, you don't understand the context. Without the knowledge, without the prior knowledge, you can't make sense of what Pavla's saying, you know, why this tiny village in the northern part of Albania, near Korcha? Why this? Because, well, this is where this clan was born, you know, like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and then they went to Australia, and then they went to Canada, so all this knowledge, plus the tech, you do this zoom in and out, and then you go back to the field work. It's always, you know, this type of going in and out in order to understand and to be able to serve the public in a proper way. Because if you're happy, you know, that you found a really interesting record in that, you know, sea of records, and you say, hey, I found that this politician is actually involved in a company with this criminal, with a guy who's convicted for drug trafficking in this country. That might be, you know, a good article, short term, that might make your name a little bit, but it would be much more important to understand why is that politician with that criminal in there, and what does that mean? Is there a larger picture there? Are there more politicians with criminals in companies? Is there an infrastructure? Are there alliances of the type that Pavla talked about? So one thing to do when you're investigating criminals is to always build on your previous reporting. This is what we do quite successfully at OCCRP, is we don't work on a story and then abandon it and we, you know, just jump like a grasshopper to the next story and so on. We always think, how do things connect between them? Because criminality is connected. Crime is a commodity. Don't forget this. Okay, so I think we have a little bit of time for questions. If you're so kind to address some questions to a bunch of criminals here. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you try to get into the mentality and the thought process of a criminal, do you find that profit and making more of it is always what drives them? Or like other things that, you know, you mentioned family ties and clan and tribalism, but even political ambition or political ideology, like does that sometimes kind of trample over the money? And like I'm thinking of, you know, groups like the Islamic State and the Taliban that are very much working these crime networks, but that have a political objective. So how does that change what they get?
Do you want me to answer or? Yeah. So the question was if criminals are motivated by other things than money, if I understood correctly. Yes. The answer is yes. It's money and it's power. Lots of times the money don't mean much, because if the criminals control an area completely, they will want to control the people there. They will want to control the land there. And yes, you can say that's a manifestation of money in the end. But it's much more than that. We're seeing areas where criminals supply services, and they're considered good people. It's also interesting that when you interview criminals, most of them will have some sort of justification for their crimes. I was interviewing, for instance, years ago, traffickers in persons, and I went all across the Balkans, country by country, interviewing these people who are selling out other humans, and asked them, why are you doing this? Many of those people were, well, we ensure the bright future for these girls from these villages, or for these kids that, you know, they live in very poor conditions, and we, you know, transport them to Spain, to Madrid and Barcelona, and they make money, and they can make a life for themselves. They have no future there. They were convinced of that. That was not a lie. So there's all sorts of motivations, but ultimately, it's always the money. This is why when you investigate crime and corruption, you gotta follow the money. And there are intersections with terrorist groups, and there are, you know, ideologies, but usually ideologies are used by the criminals to make more money or to attain other type of goals, other type of goods. Yeah, let's go here and then there. Sorry.
What's your process to apply to get the
I don't know how it is in Italy, but in my region, if you send FOIA, they just, you know, oppose it any way they can. So usually the best way is to directly approach the people and said, hey, I've read information. Well, if you need to start somehow, it's good to start with the court records, court documents, because you see who was in charge somehow. And then you see, hey, I just, read those great case. Could you tell me a little bit more? And then they will tell you more, and you just can't knock on the doors and say, hey, give me the police file. You need to build some kind of a trust. But it depends on each country. For example, I still use this like totally ugly benefit of colonialism when I come to Mexico or to Peru, and I'm white and I'm from Europe. I have quite nice access to some of the documents. It especially well works in Mexico. But what we also do is that we are network. So you can always ask your partner at that country that probably has already good contacts and is of a great help. For example, you know, who helped us in Peru is Romina, who is sitting there, who was absolutely essential when we came to get us access to some of the documents. But quite often people are just, you know, they just want to talk how they did something and that they were successful and they want to show it. You just need to, you know, let them or explain them somehow that you are not after sensationalism, you are not after, you know, exposing their faults, that you are really interested in the case.
And it's really important to create strategy around getting documents. You always file the FOIAs. You'll probably not get the information, and you try other avenues, and then you collect the information that you get, and you collect the interviews, and you store them, and you think even if the story is not going to come out now, it will be fuller, you know, later. So this is always about amassing more and more information, more and more documents. Please, there, and then.
It's super important part because all crimes have money in common. So you need to track the money to understand what was going on. So yes, we use publicly accessible documents to understand, for example, who are the lawyers they use or who are the proxies they use. You know, they are like, after those years we've been doing it, we see the patterns. We understand, oh, if there is this proxy, it means it was established by this guy, and most probably it will be focused on Russian organized crime. You know, even if the proxy is from, I don't know, South Africa. Mm-hmm. You know, you see the patterns, and that's what you learn from publicly accessible data. It's super boring to read all the annual reports and financial statements, but at some point, it always starts to make sense.
And just to add on that, Bellingcat type of tooling, OSINT, it's really, really crucial to what we're doing as well. We're using, you want to map, you know, that these criminals are involved in illegal logging somewhere, you know, they cut down the trees in the Amazon. You gotta have access to satellite imagery. You gotta be able to couple that with flight data. Flights that might go in and out, shipping data, and all that then goes into our Aleph, where we match it against, you know, companies that own those flights, those planes, those ships, those import-export databases, and also it's a combination of imagery that we're collecting, and very often we're cooperating with groups that are better than us at this, with Bellingcat, for instance, which I just mentioned. So the idea is to be able to analyze image as much as possible, and with that, to go to the records to build the body of evidence that can really serve the public. There was another question.
You know, I had this benefit that the stories came to me. I would probably never decide by myself that I'm going to focus on Balkans and cocaine trade if it wouldn't be for Stevan. But once you start to do it, the stories are just coming. You know, it's not really that we would search for new narco groups and trying to understand and write about them. It's just that, you know, it's all there. And once you start to understand how the business works, it just doesn't really stop.
Yeah, it's really, as Pavla said, about understanding patterns and following up on work. And then, you know, once you pierce the system, there's a whole world out there. And the problem is you won't be able to investigate everything that needs to be investigated. And so with this, I think we need to conclude. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Pavla.